If you've ever heard that song, Henry VIII, I Am, you might know that the first verse, well, they always say second verse, same as the first verse. And here we go again with Papa John's Scripture Notes Project. And today, with the Genesis focus, we're in chapter 20. And it feels like a repeat, like the second verse is the same as the first verse. Abraham and Sarah are traveling again. We're going to study this like we always do, trying to understand the Bible as far as it is translated correctly. Genesis chapter 20, our LDS scholar says this chapter 20, in some ways, is just a repeat of what we saw at the end of Genesis chapter 12. We see in chapter 12, Abraham and Sarah were going down into Egypt. It was that conversation of, oh, they're going to kill me, so let Pharaoh take you, and Pharaoh might take you into his harem. Well, I guess the Philistines aren't much more moral or better than the Egyptians were, because now, as they're wandering through Philistine territory, there's a king named King Abimelech. He's the Philistine equivalent to Pharaoh in Egypt. It happens all over again. Abraham turns to Sarah, "Will you please say that you're my sister instead of my wife? And then I'll survive as Abimelech takes you into his royal harem." Now, knowing what we know from the first trip, that we know that it was God's idea, not Abraham's. So he's not going to lose his man card here in this chapter either. Thank you, because it was God's idea, not his own. And knowing what we know about Abraham's character, he's willing to put his life on the line to help even his punk nephew Lot, let alone his beloved wife. Brother Halverson says, I have to assume that this was God's command again, which makes this a second round of the Abrahamic test, which was equally, perhaps even more so, a Sarah test. Abraham, will you sacrifice your wife? Will you lay her on the altar, trusting that somehow I'll bless you despite that fact? And again, in regards to Sarah, we're going to test you from your angle also. Sarah, will you lay your virtue on the altar, trusting that God can still preserve it somehow? Well, Sarah was not auditioning, of course, uh, on her personal sacrifice and faith in God in Egypt, but she found herself re enrolled in a second script, again, where she's comes away with straight A's, Brother Halverson says. She's exercising faith in God willingly, sacrifices, and lays her virtue on the altar. Abraham again lays his wife on the altar, or in this case, the king's bed, or the chance of that, and once again, the hand is stayed. We're starting to see some preview of what we're going to see in chapter 22 with their son Isaac. But the hand is stayed in both of these instances. Actually, Abraham is blessed in both instances. So it's more than just the hand is stayed. He ends up enriched like he was with Pharaoh's riches. He's going to have the same thing happen with King Abimelech. Abimelech. And notice some of the conversation, and we're going to get going right now. Verse 1, and Abraham journeying through from thence towards the south country. And I'm going to skip those words that sometimes are hard to pronounce. Verse 2, and Abraham, and I'm reading from the Joseph Smith translation, said again of Sarah his wife, she is my sister. And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. Verse 3, and Elohim came to Abimelech in a dream by night, and said unto him, behold, thou hast taken a woman which is not thine own, for she is Abraham's wife. And the Lord said unto him, thou shalt return her unto Abraham, for if thou do it not, thou shalt die. Verse 4, and Abimelech had not come near her, for Adonai had not suffered him. And he said, Adonai, wilt thou slay me and also a righteous nation? So, skipping again, the hand was stayed. Well, we're almost to that. Will thou slay also a righteous nation? Come to think of it, Brother Halverson says that was almost Abraham's exact question about Sodom and Gomorrah. Wait a minute, if there's righteous, you're not going to destroy them as if they're wicked, right? And here Abimelech is wondering the same thing. Notice the two body parts he lists: integrity of the heart and innocence of the hands. The psalmist will talk about that later in the scriptures: clean hands and a pure heart. It's not just that my actions were innocent, my motives and intention were pure. That's clean hands and a pure heart. Integrity of the heart, innocence of the hands. And verse 6, and Elohim said unto him in a dream, Yea, I know that thou didst this in the integrity of thy heart, for I also withheld thee from sinning against me. Therefore suffered I thou not to touch her. So God is basically saying, Brother Halverson says, I understand the righteous intent, so I'm actually going to help you preserve the righteous action. That's a beautiful thought, too. If my heart's in the right place, God will help my hands to stay in the right place. That's a beautiful promise. And then he says, God is clarifying, I suffered thee not to touch her. So God says, I deserve the credit. This wasn't just your fortitude. Don't take all the credit for your righteousness. But what's amazing about this is King Abimelech is having a conversation with the God of Israel, the God of Abraham and Sarah. He's talking to Jehovah himself. So he's coming to know Abraham's God and Sarah's God, and therefore coming to know something about Abraham and Sarah, also, just like we saw back in Egypt with Pharaoh. Verse 7, now therefore restore the man his wife, for he is a prophet, and he shall pray for thee, and thou shalt live. And if thou restore her not, know thou that thou shalt surely die, thou and all that are thine. So heavy handed, God is saying, I've protected him all along. Verse 8, therefore Abimelech rose early in the morning, calling all his servants, told all these things in their ears, and the men were sore afraid. So now Abraham and Sarah aren't just under divine protection, they're under the protection of the king. And all of his subjects now know who Abraham is. And in a way, I would add to Brother Halverson's insights here, they also are beginning to know the God of Israel, or the God of Abraham and Sarah at this point, who will soon be the God of Israel. And the conversation continues in verse 9 and 10, and Brother Halverson says, I love some of the things that come up here. Abimelech called Abraham and said unto him, what hast thou done unto us? But notice the next line. And what have I offended thee, that thou hast brought on me and my kingdom a great sin? Thou hast done deeds unto me that ought not to be done. And now he goes on in verse 10. Abimelech said unto Abraham, what sawest thou that thou hast done this thing? And Brother Halverson adds, I absolutely love Abimelech for this. I know he's outside of Israel. I know he's a Philistine king, and that's usually associated with wickedness. But his integrity, his innocence, and self introspection. Notice what he said. What have I offended thee? What did I do to you? Now, in a way, Abimelech is giving Abraham a huge benefit of the doubt. I'm assuming you thought that I had mistreated you. What did you see that gave you that impression? And then Abraham responds in verse 11, because I thought, surely the fear of God is not in this place. Surely the fear of Elohim is not in this place, and they will slay me for my wife's sake. So, Abraham, you may have jumped to a conclusion and assumed these people wouldn't be righteous, and they are willing to be, once they come to know the truth. There's more innocence and integrity here than you realize. So don't assume things just because people are different, just because people are outside of your covenant. They may be trying to live whatever covenants they believe as well. Verse 21, here he does defend his alleged dishonesty, and Abraham says, yet indeed she is my sister. Okay, I mean, I wasn't totally false with you. She's the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. Again, like we said earlier, back then, as long as you were related, brother and sister fits. Uh, and basically, this ends. Uh, uh, this it ends friendly, amicably. In fact, it ends with great again pouring out of on Amalek's part. Uh, he basically enriches Abraham, and let me show you, there's no hard feelings. So in the next few verses, it describes the great wealth that he gives to Abraham. And verse 13, and it came to pass when Elohim caused me to wander from my father's house, that I said unto her, this is thy kindness, which thou shalt show unto me at every place whither we shall come. Say of me, he is my brother. So he's describing how God had instructed him to always protect his wife and his own life in this manner. And Abimelech took sheep and oxen and men servants and women servants and gave unto Abraham and restored him Sarah his wife. And Abimelech said, behold, my land is before thee. Dwell where it pleaseth thee. So he's allowing them to stay in his kingdom. And unto Sarah he said, behold, I have given thy brother 1,000 pieces. He refers to Abraham as her brother. I think that's a little jab back at them. 1,000 pieces of silver. Behold, he is to thee a covering of the eyes unto all that are with thee, and with all other. Thus she was reproved. So basically, he's saying, um, and Brother Howerson loves the fact that he has the guts to speak to her face to face and not just Abraham. He's recognizing her own reality, Sarah's own identity, and her own individuality and her divine worth. And now that he's reproved them and he's chastened her, but yet Brother Halverson thinks that's a bad translation, because he goes, I looked at other translations for this verse, and there are some better ones than the King James Version. One version says, you are completely vindicated. Another says, before all men you are cleared. Another says, it is a sign of your innocence in the eyes of all who are with you. And so he's basically saying, I want you to know, I want everyone else to know that you are clean, that you weren't giving away your virtue, that you were holding on to it. And what is that virtue worth? How about 1,000 pieces of silver? Not in exchange. I'll give you that in exchange for your virtue type thing. No, I will give you this as proof that you still have and retain your virtue. Beautiful insights I would have missed without Brother Halverson. Verse 17, so Abraham prayed unto Elohim, and Elohim healed Abimelech and his wife and his maidservants, and they bare children. And we're wondering why he's doing this. Well, in verse 18, it explains, and by name, the divine name, for Yehovah had fast closed up all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. So there we see the specific consequences. Interestingly, none of the women in the household of Abimelech could have children during the time that passed as this was happening. And Brother Halverson says, I don't know how long that lasted. I don't understand the complete circumstances, but it's amazing to think, wait, you mess with somebody else's family, then you reap what you sow. That's exactly what happened here. And what he's speaking of is because Sarah couldn't have children or hadn't yet had children, they basically were inheriting her barrenness. The last thing Brother Halverson says is, speaking of a family that can't have children, God blesses Abimelech. You can now have seed. And in next in chapter 21, Sarah, since you've passed yet another test, you can now have seed too. And that's what we're going to get into next time with the next episode of Papa John's Scripture Notes. I look forward to talking to you again soon.